Touch the fire. Burn your hands with the desire of the future. It's hopeless in this battle, and we're losing. And searching for perfection, but searching isn't finding. Sit back, relax, 'cause love is blind.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the R Complex. Today we'll be looking at narcotic signs and symbols. Why are signs and symbols so important? Why would power-obsessed, primal struggle for survival dominators of the human race be so obsessed with signs and with symbols? I think it comes down to an understanding, a deep, nuanced understanding of the human mind. An understanding of what our pressure points are. These are people who've learned over time to map our weaknesses. And one of our weaknesses, one of our pressure points, one of our fallibilities as human beings that is exploited every day is a sensory one. And we have a tendency to vastly over-rely on that which we see. Why? Well, I'm not a biologist, but I would theorize that the most important data we receive moment to moment in terms of our safety and our survival is visual. It is not auditory, it's not kinesthetic, it's not proprioception. All of these, of course, are very important, but the visual sense is the one that we use the most because it's giving us the most important data about the environment. When we overuse the visual sense, what tends to happen, unfortunately, is the human brain, forgive my drawing, this is a brain, will be susceptible to spectacle. Right now, it is March of 2020. We're in the grip of the coronavirus pandemic, and I, as a joke, on my Instagram account, released an image yesterday that showed a lion walking through Russia, and it pretended to be a news article that said Vladimir Putin has released lions onto the streets of Russia to force people into a curfew. And I thought that was quite funny. My inbox was inundated by people telling me that that was fake news. And I said, no, it's not fake news, it is a joke. But that's an indicator to me of how quickly and easily people can be convinced by a perspective. It wasn't even a video, it was a still shot that appeared to be from news saying that Vladimir Putin had released lions on the street to enforce a curfew. And people then leapt to the conclusion that that's a possible strategy that a politician of a country would use to help maintain law and order. We're very susceptible to spectacle. We're very susceptible to what we see. I think that spectacle has a dominating effect on us. That which we see, that which can be seen, that which induces an emotional response, especially from our pressure points, where our pressure points already mentioned guilt and shame, but of course there is also sexuality. So spectacle hits us in the emotions, and it also hits us in the biological drives. So if you see a thing that could potentially induce anger in you, it will be stronger than if you hear a thing that could induce anger in you. If you see something that could induce lust in you, it will generally be stronger than if you hear a thing that could induce lust in you. So it triggers the emotions, and it triggers biological responses like the desire for sex, the desire to run away from threat, the desire to eat food, the desire to sleep, the desire to fight. All of these things that keep us locked down in the more primal, lower chakra levels, the animalistic elements of the body. because we're so susceptible to spectacle, and because it tends to induce submission in us, because it goes straight to our pressure points, I think the Narchons have figured out that slaves are susceptible to symbols. In fact, slavery and mastery and symbology have gone hand in hand since the dawn of time. Not all symbols would be something that would be drawn or shown. Sometimes a symbol would be something you would hold. So you'll see magicians, I think in the tarot cards, the magus, he stands at a table like this, and he has various aspects of magic, and he'll be holding a wand, which represents yang, masculine energy, and a cup, which represents yin, feminine energy. It's a reference to sexual polarity. That's a symbol. When you look at old pictures of pharaohs or of kings, they hold staffs, they hold canes, they hold things. Sometimes you'll see them holding snakes. They'll be holding a thing that denotes their authority. Those also are symbols. So these symbols, these logos, throughout human history, I would say, have always been an intrinsic part of the master-slave dynamic. In order for me to crawl up to the top of the pyramid, like a good narcissistic psychopath, to take power over everybody beneath me, I need to let the people beneath me know that they're beneath me. How would I do that? I'd be wearing certain clothes, I might have a special hat or indeed a crown, I might be wearing colours that are only for masters or lords or archons, and I might be holding the symbols of my office, perhaps a whip or a cane or something that lets you know that if you do something naughty, I'm going to hurt you. This has been there, in my humble opinion, since the dawn of human consciousness. The master-slave relationship has always come with symbols. Logos, signs, even corporate logos, I think are an effort to tap into the same element of the human mind which has a pressure point to that which is remembered in our unconscious racial history, which generates a feeling of submission. So whether you're looking at the symbol for Ford or McDonald's or your local supermarket, there is an element of master-slave communication there in which you defer to the symbol. Note, the symbols are usually above you, so you must look up. There's only one other scenario outside of shops that I'm aware of, and billboards, where you look up at the logos of the corporations who are selling you things, of the corporations who effectively own me and own you. And that is in churches, where if you walk into an old Catholic church, what happens? Christ is up high and you look up. The saints that you walk past, they're up high, so you look up. When else in your life were you looking up at people bigger and more important than you when you were a child? It's infantilizing. The whole purpose of this, with the symbols, is to take you back to an infantilized, childlike state where you look up in wonder and awe at the power of mummy and daddy and their agency in the adult world, which you can only dream of and aspire to as a child.
In continuation with a series of catecheses on the Holy Spirit, Pope Francis talked about the gift of counsel. He said that through this gift, God leads people to the right path. But he added that this spiritual gift can only be found through a constant and intimate prayer to God.
So it's to reduce you back to a childlike state. The master-slave relationship is much like a parent with a child. I control your calories. I control your shelter. I control whether you go out or do not go out. I control whether you're in pain or not in pain. I control everything. So I think there's an obsession with these people, with their symbols. Remember as well, they cannot legitimately communicate. They can only do what we said in an earlier episode, which is signal, because they are trapped in the reptilian complex. They're in the reptile brain. They're not in the human brain, where higher order reasoning, rationality, and authentic debate at the horizontal level between two equal adult humans can occur. They're not there. They can only signal. Well, what is a logo? What is a symbol? It's a signal. And same in biology. If you were going to signal that you were a worthy mate, it would be by your fur, by your color, by the shape and the size of your horns. Similarly with this, they need symbols, they need logos, they need artifacts to show that they're bigger, they're better, they're stronger, and they're the master and you're the slave. So it actually falls back into signaling as well. This describes to you why I think the symbols are so important to them and so important to the manipulation of human psychology. In the next section, we'll get into what some of those symbols are. Thank you. It's interesting to notice how much sun symbology we see in the narcotic symbols. Why is that? When you're talking about narcissism, really the narcissistic worldview is, I am the center of the universe. I am the ultimate. I am God. I am omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, and I am the giver of all life in that universe. So of course they would identify with the sun itself as the highest manifestation of God since primitive times. We've always loved our star as it is responsible for everything that is good on the earth. It is the life-giving star. They want to put themselves in front of that. They want to bear the symbols of the sun as though through association, they could say, we're the ones who give life. We're the source of everything. They're not. They're not. They have to supplicate just as much to that as we do. There is also an association that goes back to at least the time of the ancient Egyptians, possibly before, with several different gods and the eye in the sun, the eye at the top of the triangle. The sun is the peak. He's the master of all the other, he's not a planet, but he would have been seen as a planet in those times. Of all the other planets in the solar system, he's the boss. He's the big one. He's the ultimate one. And he seems to look, it's been said that to the ancient Egyptians, they didn't perceive the idea of light as coming into the eye. They actually thought that we as human beings and animals with eyes, that we pushed an energy out of our eyes in order to see. That was their perception. And so you do have Ra is one god, but there are several gods. Horus, whose eye was associated with the sun. And there was this concept of an all-seeing eye, reflected again in the Eye of Sauron in the story of The Lord of the Rings. And the two towers of The Lord of the Rings. So you have this idea of an all-seeing eye. Well, what would that have to do with narcissism and psychopathy and an archontic worldview? Well, if you were a slave owner, you would want your slaves to believe that you were watching them at all times. You would want them to believe that you could see what they were doing and that you could even see into their hearts and into their minds so that you could get total blind submission. You don't just want to control their behavior, remember. You want to control the thoughts and emotions that generate the behavior. So in ancient Egyptian times, these were not seen as evil symbols, far from it. They were seen as good symbols. The sun was seen as good. The Eye of Horus and the Eye of Ra was seen as good, as life-giving, as something that was beneficial. But as with most things, these narcotic entities have perverted that worldview. They've changed it and turned it into being what they're obsessed with, which is dominance. There was an Egyptian pharaoh called Akhenaten. That wasn't the name he was born with. He gave himself the name Aten, which meant the son of the sun. The Aten, or the Aten Ra, was the sun. And he did away with all other gods. And he said, we don't need any other gods. All we need is Aten. All we need is the sun. We can have a monotheistic religion. In many ways, he's seen as the first monotheist that we have on historical record. He was an intelligent guy, and he thought that he could take the power away from the archons, from the priest class, from the nobility, and just give it back to the people. He said, okay, you don't need all these different priests, you don't need all these different sacrifices, you don't need all these different fighting gods, you just go straight to the big god, the Aten Ra, you go to the sun. And obviously the priests really didn't like that, and as soon as he died, they went and smashed all of his iconography and all of his everything that he had done to try and erase him. But he was, in a sense, the first person who brought a monotheistic worldview of there being just one God that was accessible to everybody. I suppose it was inevitable that in time they would start moving in that direction, but it's interesting to see just how perverted that idea has become over time by these R-complex narcotic entities who've taken these ideas and twisted them up to the point where if you say to somebody now, who's Lucifer? Who's Lucifer? You say. And people say, I know who Lucifer is. That's the devil. That's the devil, that is. That's Satan. There is no biblical reference that indicates that Lucifer is Satan. Lucifer, the first light, the son of the morning, is, according to some people, Jesus himself. And before you jump out your chair and switch me off, you can Google this. You can go and look it up on Wikipedia. In the Catholic Church, there are still songs sung at Easter to Lucifer that are sung in Latin that are to Jesus. Why does this happen? Because the Narchons are all about inversion. Nothing pleases them more than taking good and making it evil, than taking a virtue and making it a sin, and taking a sin and making it a virtue. Those are the times that we live in now. They're taking nastiness, evil, viciousness, and turning that into the best thing you can be. Can anybody deny that being a narcissist nowadays is not something that we all celebrate?
If everybody's exceptional, nobody's exceptional. If everybody's famous, nobody's famous. So in order to get ahead, you have to be like a really, really aggressive psychopathic narcissist. And again, that is rewarded. Are you punished for not being an aggressive psychopathic narcissist? Well, if to you not being in the game, in the top 10 of the game is a punishment, then yes. I mean, to even get into the top 100 now, you're competing with the world. You're not just competing with your country, you're not just competing with your village, you're competing with the global community. By the way, a global community that has never been as large as it is now. We're in the middle of a population huge explosion. So you're competing with vast numbers of people and you're losing. You're losing. Doesn't matter how amazing you are, you're losing. You did something wonderful yesterday, it's shit today. You did something wonderful 15 minutes ago, it's shit now, because other people have done it.
Indeed, isn't the notion of a celebrity, a person to be celebrated, just synonymous with narcissism? These are not, kind people who are contributing to the best of humanity for the good of everybody else. They're pointless, vain, titillators of the worst elements of human perception. There's really very little that they do that offers anything more than something to do with sex, something to do with violence, something to do with fear, something to do with materialism. That's the point. The symbols of the stars that we look at, the stars, the celebrities, they are now the new lights, the new Lucifers. They're the ones that we're supposed to be looking up to. So instead of looking up to something good, kind, wise, compassionate, and decent, we look up to things that are fairly crummy and that lead us back to the most negative elements of ourselves. It's like an energetic transmission. Instead of being allowed to plug in to something higher than yourself so that you can elevate, they trick you into plugging you back into the worst parts of yourself so that instead of ascending, you descend. So this obsession with the eye, the sparkling eye and the sun, I think it is a false attempt by people who are completely deluded who are selling a lie to associate themselves with something that they have no business associating themselves with. They want to present themselves as all powerful. They are not. That deception is never more powerful than truth, but deception can be powerful, but it's not more powerful than truth. Truth will always trump deception. They want to associate themselves with the sun, with that which is most yang, with that which is most life-giving. But they're not yang, they're not life-giving.
Spoiler alert, season 2 is on the way, so in the end, he obviously didn't kill himself. Just like Jeffrey Epstein. Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care. You had to make your own way here in your own plane, didn't you? All the best actors have jumped to Netflix and HBO, you know, and the actors who just do Hollywood movies now do fantasy adventure nonsense. They wear masks and capes and really tight costumes. Their job isn't acting anymore, it's going to the gym twice a day and taking steroids, really. Have we got an award for most ripped junkie?
They're deceivers, they dwell in darkness, and their intent is manifested not in the light of the sun, but in the dark. There is a term in Islam for people who are to be seen as sinners, which is kuffar. And in Arabic, a kuffar etymologically relates to the tendency to dig and hide something in the earth. A kuffar, a sinner in Islam, is somebody who hides the truth from the light of consciousness, from sunlight. That's a kuffar, that's a sinner. So these symbols that they've used, they're hijacked and they're misused. They claim to be sun worshippers, they're not. They claim to be all powerful, they're not. They use and misuse the Eye of Ra, the Eye of Horus, but really probably have very little understanding of what it is. In fact, I think nowadays it's as much about winking and nodding to each other and, you know, doing the old elbow jig, aren't we clever boys, than it is about anything else. They're trying to maintain power based on the old way of doing things. But like all narcissists and psychopaths, and all narcissistic psychopaths, they have overestimated how clever they are, and they've underestimated the resilience and the power of the people that they've targeted. They use and misuse the sun, the eye, and the pyramid, I think, because they want to ape the behavior of the people, the entities that probably are the ones who put us here. So I think that what they're doing is they're aping the behavior of our actual creators. I do think our stories, our mythology, through all of human history, pan-cultural, across the globe, of the people who descended from heaven to make men and to make women, I think is probably going to be rooted in some kind of truth. The idea that those gods and goddesses have left is probably going to be rooted in some kind of truth, and we were what was left behind. Some people, some humans, then sought to ape the behavior of our authentic masters, to take over from them, to mimic what they did so that they could be in charge. This is not a unique hypothesis. Many people have said this. It even goes to the point where if you look at the pyramids and the sphinxes in Giza, that there were actually two phases, and what we're looking at are not the original sphinx head. Something else was there, and then it was changed to represent something else or somebody else. Whoever that something else or somebody else was is a little worm who, when daddy's back is turned, has crawled into a position of power and gone, well, daddy's away now, so now I'm going to be in charge. So the pyramid is there, basically. Why do they keep using pyramids? They keep using suns, they keep using eyes. I think it's to get into our racial memory. And when I say racial, I mean the human race. It accesses the unconscious. It allows us to understand very quickly that there is a hierarchy and that we're not at the top. What's at the top? The sun is at the top. What's at the top? The all-seeing eye is at the top. Who's at the bottom? The schlubs, the slaves. We are. We're at the bottom. Who's at the top? A very small minority of people. The narcissistic psychopaths are at the top. So I think it's It's an abuse, it's a misuse. In psychological terms, it would be considered a repetition compulsion or a repetition complex. So people who have been abused, unfortunately, tend to perpetuate abuse. The expression you'll often hear in counseling is hurt people hurt people. So if you were enslaved, you will seek to enslave. If you were abused, you might seek to abuse. If you were assaulted, you may seek to assault. And I think that that is what's happened, and that's why if you just go through corporate logos, just pick them at random and look for suns, look for eyes, and look for pyramids. They are everywhere. They are, without doubt, the most popular basis for most corporate logos out there in the world.
That's it. Good night. Thank you. Please donate to Australia. Have a great time. Get drunk. Take your drugs.